Page 14, FICMAT, LAO.
Edgar Cabral with the LAO. This issue is related to FICMAT, which is the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Teams. This program, this is funding for staff who provide assistance to districts on budget, cash, and administration type issues. In the February 09 budget that created the flexibility, also provided or cut FICMAT by 20%. It was about $2.25 million. The governor didn't make any changes to that. He continued the same level of funding, and so did the Assembly. The Senate, though, restored the reduction, and it did it by redirecting $2.25 million in categorical funds that would, instead of going to other categorical programs, would go to restore this cut. We would go with the Senate version on this just because, given the fiscal situation in the state, the FICMAT agency itself has had a huge increase in workload in trying to help out districts and help them manage during these times when they're trying to figure out how to best balance their budgets.
Yes, it's a challenge. Finance?
Thomas Todd, Finance. We're not actually in a position to support either at this point, but we do see the logic in the Senate's restoration for the reasons that Edgar mentioned. More than half of the funding in this particular item actually goes to reimburse county offices for fiscal oversight of districts, and we've seen an uptick in activity associated with county office reviews.
When so many of them are close to the edge, and we've got all these different things going on. Keeping the accountability going was why we were concerned. I mean, we can leave it open if...
Our suggestion on this is, to the extent you do go with the Senate version, that you add some provisional language to get FICMAT to essentially justify the increase in workload. We think that's reasonable for them to demonstrate that.
Maybe there's a sliding way to do this that suggests that up to X of something could be used to the extent necessary, or... I mean, we might... If we think about it a little bit, maybe we can... find a place. It is also part of unspent prior year monies. Is that what this is? That you all spent on other ways, right?
No, actually, the proposal as now would be just to take the 10-11 funding and that $2.25 million that would have gone out to the 40 categorical programs through the Flex, and instead would be redirected to FICMAT. That's another way that you could also do it, is just to take one-time funds. You would leave the other programs alone, and you could use $2.25 million in one-time funds to fund it this year.
Yeah, instead of one of those other things.
Or even one-time. Our funding that we provide can be used over a 3-year period. You could provide a bigger amount.
It argues to leave it open until we lay out a prior year, current year, budget year scenario that understands what's out there. I mean, maybe instead of like we just talked about, the emergency repairs. I mean, that's one-time option, but this is a one-time option too, right?
Right.
So, and we ought to look at the possibility of the language as Finance is suggesting, that maybe it's an up to number as opposed to a hard number. That
I think you can make the case.
To the extent you all need money to do this, you need to spend it. I mean, in a way, because this is, we don't want anybody falling off the cliff and going bankrupt while we're going through this as much as possible. I don't know how to think about that. All right. Let's just leave it open for right now. I think I'm inclined to at least give them something, but I don't know that we've got resolution on the categorical cut yet, so it's hard to reallocate the money. All right, CDE Ops. Is there any objection to the Assembly version? Mr. Nielsen, Mr. Dutton? Page 15. Savings in the CDE operations. Is there any objection to the...
Madam Chair.
Yes, Finance?
Ryan Storm from Finance. We would like to ask your permission to work with your staff in the LAO to come up with some alternatives to what is being proposed in the Assembly action. Namely, we've identified a number of areas in which I think the LAO has overlooked a few areas in which we think they haven't discounted enough for a number of positions at the Department of Ed that may cause too deep of a cut for the department. Specifically, there's a school fiscal services division that sends out a lot of money to school districts, and we're concerned that by including them in the fold, we would be in a position where we might be adversely impacting school districts and the money that they could receive a little quicker than under this proposal. The other thing, too, is that we think that the LAO's proposal hasn't necessarily discounted ACES positions, which is the after-school program. I think if we were able to all get together and work on it a little bit better, we could get some savings out of this in general fund-wise, but also give the department a little better shake at the cut.
All right. Does any of the staffs feel equally, I mean, should we, Finance wants to leave it open and talk about it with LAO and all staffs? Just everybody needs to get that I think everybody wants savings here. So the higher the dollar amount, the better. This is general fund savings. Senator Dutton?
Yeah, we'd go with either Senate or Assembly.
You know, another option you could do is take the savings now and just direct staff to try to figure out which positions to take.
That's a thought. I mean, if that's the issue, Finance, you know. We understand there were vacancies there. I mean,
right, and a number of the...
we could leave the, I mean, it's almost like an unallocated cut, but you could leave the which positions question to some sorting system.
Sorry, Jim Soland, LAO. Just to add one piece to all of this, there's a specific fiscal division in the department that I think the Department of Finance has some concerns about. They were used in part to help form the basis for our estimate, but in no way were they meant to be the specific positions that would be identified for elimination.
Yeah, they shouldn't be. The fiscal
Right.
ones, right? Yeah.
Sure.
That's why we're asking that we could just take another stab at it, leave it open for now, and then do another go-around.
Madam Chair, I would move
Okay.
scoring the Assembly dollars with the recommendation of looking at a work group to look at prospectively figuring out how they can satisfy their
Okay,
obligations.
yeah,
with
just
their
bring
workload.
back that thing so that we know what positions. I mean, I think we would want to review what positions it may cause some adjustment, but by doing the dollars, we create a target for you all. That said, on a, Mr. Nielsen? On a 5-0 vote? Sorry, Alan Sampers. 4-0 on the Senate side, leave it on call for Senator Lowenthal to add on, should he choose to do so. Okay, sorry. He had to go to another committee to add on. Okay. Page 16, mandate suspension.
Again, Jim Soland, LAO. There's a handout that should be going around right now on mandates. I'll just walk through it quickly. On the first page, it just shows that the state currently imposes about 45 K-12 mandates. Many of these have dozens of sub-requirements that create a pretty big strain for districts trying to implement them. The types of claimable activities range pretty significantly, anywhere from something like requiring immunizations for students and checking that they have them, to something like a phys ed requirement that's somewhat duplicative, as well as to filing the mandate claims themselves. The annual cost of mandates is growing pretty significantly and could double depending on the outcome of litigation that the Department of Finance is engaged in on high school science graduation requirement mandate. Without that mandate, you're looking at about $190 million in annual costs. With that mandate, about $370 million in annual costs. As you likely know, the state has typically deferred payments for these mandates, essentially providing no funding on a year-to-year basis while districts are still required to perform the activities. That practice has led to a significant backlog, part of the K-12 credit card, that's at about $1 billion, excluding, again, high school graduation requirements, and is going to could reach $3.2 billion if that mandate is factored in. Turning to page 2, one of the biggest issues with this kind of debt being accrued on mandates is that there are several major long-standing problems with mandates in the mandate process. For example, many mandates don't serve a compelling purpose. You have an example like physical education reports that is data reported to the Department of Ed that's essentially already collected elsewhere, or the requirement that you notify a teacher when a student is mandatorily expelled, even though you would hope that the student not showing up for a few days would be enough to tip them off to the fact that the student is no longer in their class.
How did it get to be a mandate to ask people to graduate? Isn't that sort of like what you're in business to do?
You would hope. You would hope. So in addition to many of the mandates not serving a particularly compelling purpose, costs can obviously be higher than expected. The rates going out to districts can be pretty radically different without a firm basis in the actual activity. This is important to remember because all of this occurs within Prop 98, so really all you're doing with this pot of money is creating winners and losers among districts by virtue of the mandate process. And just a couple more, it rewards inefficiency oftentimes and ignores the effectiveness of the mandate by and large. So really what you're seeing here is, for the most part, by definition, a policy becoming a mandate can undermine the very policies that you're attempting to achieve. Turning to page 3 of our handout, just look at some of the plans really quickly. The governor's plan is to suspend all but 3 K-12 mandates. This would mean that essentially the requirement is off the books for a year, and the state's obligation to pay is also off the books. And this addresses, I should have mentioned on the previous page, a court finding that the process of deferring mandates is essentially unconstitutional. And so the suspension is really one way to help address that court's finding. The Assembly plan continues sort of the current system of deferral, whereby essentially districts aren't paid on a regular basis but are still beholden to the activity. And then finally, the Senate plan funds 12 mandates that are deemed critical. And by critical, we really mean mandates that serve some sort of fundamental oversight, public safety, or accountability purpose. It eliminates five mandates deemed non-essential and suspends the remainder, then creates a working group to review the merits of the mandates that are suspended and make recommendations. We recommend that you adopt the Senate plan. It's largely based on a report that we put out in February that it provided guidelines for comprehensive K-12 mandate reform. In addition, it really only supports sort of high-priority mandates rather than some of the mandates that aren't really serving essential purposes, and thereby ensures that Prop 98 funding isn't being spent needlessly. And the one piece that I'll just close on is there are obviously a lot of difficult decisions before you related to the education budget. This is one very concrete area where you could make a change and make things easier for districts, many fewer activities that they'd have to cope with given the cuts that they're dealing with now, and a pretty easy way to make life easier for districts given the cuts.
Hey, is anybody... I take it we may not be ready to close this. I don't know how anybody feels. Members, it's the pleasure of the committee. People want to ask some more questions about some of the ones and which ones are which, and does everybody even know what half of these mandates do or don't do? I don't know. Mr. Nielsen? No? Senate version? Mr. Huff? Mr. Blumenfeld?
We're not comfortable with the Senate version. We're still on the Assembly version, and we think a lot of this should be done through the policy committees.
Finance, where are you?
Thomas Todd, Finance. We obviously continue to support the governor's budget plan, as Jim described it.
You don't want to eliminate mandates instead of just suspending them?
We would be happy to engage in that discussion. What I would suggest to you is that suspension, though, it buys you some time. So to the extent you really want to have a rigorous discussion about significant amendments to mandates or wholesale elimination of mandates, if you suspend, for at least a year, you have the opportunity to have that dialogue, because I think everybody is essentially in agreement that if you're going to eliminate or fundamentally change these mandates, that should be going through the policy process. So suspension would buy you the time to do that.
But we did suspend 22.
Or, I'm sorry.
To push them in. But,
well, right. But, I mean, to the extent that you wanted to, go above and beyond.
If you suspend high school exit exam, you're not paying people for giving it. That's dicey.
High school exit exam, we actually fund. That's one of the 3 that we fund.
Oh, you fund 3? Which 3 do you fund of the 12 that we funded?
Yeah, so we fund 3. We fund the cost of the Casey, as well as inter and intra-district attendance. And the rationale for funding those 3 is that those are requirements for receiving federal funds, essentially.
Okay,
that's why we funded those 3.
on the LAO chart as 2. Is that what you're telling me? The first 2 on the LAO's page 4 are the ones that you fund?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so DOF funds these two.
Yeah, so we fund those three.
So how far apart are we? Well, okay, they show it as two. That's why it's confusing when you say
Yeah.
that. So you don't fund hepatitis and some of those?
No,
That
we
doesn't
just fund
concern you?
those three, and then we suspend everything else, is what we do in our plan.
It's a little dicey. I think the problem with the deferral assembly you may want to think about afterwards is the point they raised. That was found illegal in 2008, and
Right.
that's why folks are moving away from it. But
Right, and that was one of the primary rationales for us to move towards suspension was the court
yeah.
case,
That was the court
right? I mean,
case.
that's the new reality
Are we
that we're
still on
dealing with.
appeal, or is that case?
The case is in its very initial stages. It's in the initial briefing stages, so we won't have a
So we
decision
don't
on that
know.
case for months.
We've just been challenged on the point. Okay, so that's what.
And again,
okay.
our office spent hours over the last year giving you a package that either funded or eliminated each one. It went through, dealt with it on its merits. Your Senate plan funds about a dozen, eliminates 5, and suspends the remainder. So I think we would argue at this point in the game, it's the sort of most reasonable plan that's been laid out there to try to have differential treatment between those things, like an immunization, which might be deemed very critical, and other things like PE, which would be deemed far less critical. So again, we think this is at least sort of a good faith effort to try to clean up the system, still acknowledging you've got dozens that will be suspended, and there'll be some process moving forward to try to figure out how those should be treated.
The LAO
Right.
plan hasn't been vetted publicly yet in hearings or anything to that effect.
It was in the Senate.
Well, both
This
of the
is subcommittee
subcommittees
action,
had hours of conversation on these particular
Subcommittee
things.
talked about this for a day.
So
It was talked about both in subcommittee and full committee in the Senate. Ms. Skinner?
Well, not to speak to which mandates may be necessary or not necessary, because I think they do need to be reviewed. If we just take, and apologies for using your comment as an example, but you indicated that the hepatitis one might be a very important mandate because of the public health implications. Well, PE from that point of view may also, due to the, I mean, we have an obesity epidemic right now. So I think that the approach either from LAO, the Senate, or the governor's office is more kind of, we don't like mandates, so we're in a crisis right now with the budget, so let's just move forward on, knocking some of these out. And while I probably err on not liking mandates either, I think it's probably something that needs to be weighed again. You can't always predict what are unintended consequences, but you do have to weigh it through the policy process. There is an assembly bill right now, bipartisan bill, that is going through the process, 2082, that is looking at a bunch of mandates. And so I'm more comfortable with the assembly version because it does defer, a number of them, but allows that policy bill to go forward, which may bring some resolution on some of these.
And if I may, just the one thing that I would add on that is that there really is a fundamental difference between having a policy that you want to implement versus having it in a mandate. And that's really what we're trying to get at is, the physical education one is a good example of where, of course, you want your kids, exercising, and that's an important piece of the obesity question. But when you have it in a mandate form, that essentially means you lose your accountability for whether or not they're doing it effectively at the local level. You lose just your oversight in general. So a lot of the core of what you would want your policy to be is undermined by having it as a mandate. And that's why we say you should really only be funding something as a mandate, creating a mandate when it's an activity that needs to be done and is very easy to check up on versus something that's a little more convoluted, like are they providing enough physical education and appropriate physical education?
Noticing parents of truancy, you would think districts would have some incentive to do on their own. But Mr. Blumenfield.
What about collective bargaining? I mean, that's a mandate.
Yeah, well, that's a big one. That one.
I mean, how do we justify proposing getting rid of that as a mandate?
Well, right now it's on the suspension list, and again, this would be suspension essentially for the period that it takes the working group to review the mandate. So given the collective bargaining structures that are in place, the likelihood that anything significant would happen to that process in the next few months seems highly unlikely. Our particular approach to the mandate,
all the districts have bargaining agreements at the moment, so
Yeah, but what is the point in suspending something like that?
I think the question is just taking time to, right, so it's a fairly costly mandate, but the bigger issue is trying to decide what exactly you want to do with it in the long run, because our office has done an analysis that essentially shows the vast majority of the requirements in collective bargaining should never have been a mandate. The decision was decided before the Commission on State Mandates even existed. Yeah. So it would really be going through the collective bargaining statute and figuring out what can be referred back to the Commission and reduce some of the costs. So that's really the analysis that would go on during the suspension period.
You know, and another thing to consider here is that despite the fact that we're going to suspend the mandate and relieve the district of the legal responsibility to perform the activity, there are all sorts of reasons why districts might continue to perform the activity, right? I mean, there are pressures at the local level sometimes to continue to do these things. In some cases, there are strong financial incentives to do these things, and so we don't for a minute think that by suspending, the vast majority of these mandates, that a lot of these activities still aren't going to occur. So,
sort of cart before the horse kind of thing.
Well, I think part of the problem with this is the Commission on State Mandates and how it decides what things cost and what things. I mean, the process by which it's decided that it's a mandate and not just something you should do because you should do it. I mean, the classic is that one up there, graduation requirement. The fact that we have a requirement for graduation is considered a mandate, and the state has to reimburse the district for doing what you'd think the district was designed to do, which is graduate students. And I don't know how to. I think that's the problem folks are confronting is the Commission on State Mandates has come up with these odd ways of defining mandates. Collective bargaining is certainly something that should exist. But why is it a mandate that we have a law that says you collectively bargain? I mean, and why should the state, through a separate process than the regular 98 funding process for schools, have to fund release time and such when the school district gets funding, and they should fund their own release time? I mean, that's really where the fight is. It's not about not doing the thing. Right. It goes back to Mr. Nielsen. Were you?
Well, Madam Chair, the Assembly bill, I understand, kind of tinkers with the process, the Commission of State Mandates process. I don't exactly recall it, but vaguely do. But I don't think it takes any strong stand, and this is a strong stand. And I think that this is time to fish or cut bait. When, if not now, can we do something like this? So I'd like to move the Senate version. If I lose the vote, fine, but I'd like to see this go to a vote.
Well, the Assembly Democrats have asked to keep it open. I think I don't know if we're quite there yet. And Finance, I think, needs to look at it too because they were on a different program. Also, they only funded 3. We funded 12.
Right.
I don't want to have it defeated because it could get there. Could get closer, would appear. So we'll let everybody digest. We'll move on.
Just
All
to
right.
clarify.
Yes.
Just to clarify, in the situation of deferring, the meter keeps running, right?
That's correct.
It's not as if the schools have to perform the mandate.
Right.
They're not going to get paid.
No, the deferral, they do get paid.
Well,
That's the
but
difference.
not going to get paid immediately.
Right.
But we're still paying.
Right.
That's absolutely right. And especially that we're looking at something like $3.2 billion for the backlog. I mean, I think one of the very real implications of this is that when you actually do have the funding to pay for this, you're likely on the far side of a recession. And so rather than being able to use the money to restore some of the cuts that you've had to make, a lot of the money will likely have to go out to the schools for mandate backlog, and again, it'll be going out to the districts on a disproportionate basis, really funding the districts that are good at sort of filing mandate claims rather than the ones that have necessarily been performing the activity in a good faith.
It would be paying with interest.
Yes,
with interest.
That's the key.
It's all within 98, though. It's not like you're creating more money or less money.
You're adding to the credit card that you're ultimately going to have to pay off, is what you're doing.
This is one of the most important points because this is the one area where the state has not taken any action to date to reduce its credit card or its costs. So by the virtue of deferring, districts are having to conduct these activities. The state ultimately is having to pay for them. And some of these activities are the most questionable of things that we ask that the state asks districts to do. You've had a conversation earlier earlier this morning on categorical flexibility. This is very similar in some regards to categorical programs. They're just funded on a reimbursement basis when the state gets around to it, as opposed to on a grant basis front up. So again, this is the one area where there are potential state savings, but the state has yet to really take action to achieve them.
It's tricky. I mean, it is tricky because some of these things are things you want districts to do, and it goes to the statewide versus local control problem that we have in local mandates, where we will have a similar conversation, I suspect.
To give you just one additional piece of information, to the extent that you defer, the clock on the debt continues to tick, and it continues to accrue interest. And for the last 2 years, on the mandate sort of backlog that we have now, we have accrued interest of $30 million a year.
Yeah, no, that's part of the problem. So, okay, let's finance. I mean, just the sense is that at least not in the proportions necessary, but there is sort of majority support to move toward the LAO here. So let's kind of see where we can, if we can reconcile to that at some level, and Assembly get a little chance to digest some of the possibilities. And I don't know, it could be a variation on the theme, but this notion of eliminating some and doing something to some of them is
of course the assembly plan actually pays the mandates back.
Right, you have.
I mean, we have a different approach in that sense.
Yeah, no, that's true. They actually paid the $1 billion down in the assembly plan, so that it doesn't continue to accumulate as much when they defer. That's true. That does make a difference. Okay, page 17. 17, science.
So this is a specific mandate that we've already discussed a little bit relating to high school science graduation requirements. Part of the reason it bears separate discussion is, as I've already mentioned, it's the largest mandate and is really going to add to the backlog significantly. It's a mandate that's been involved in litigation and all kinds of issues over the years, but the bottom line is, in 1983, the state required that 2 science courses rather than 1 be completed for graduation. At the time, most folks didn't really think it was going to result in mandate costs. As a result of sort of the evolution of the
1983?
Yes. It's since that time, it's been heard a few times by the commission. There's been a court case. There's yet another court case. And all of this really stems from the fact that the law was created before the mandate process was really developed. And so we didn't know how to phrase the requirement to suggest that it should occur within your resources as a school. If you're providing this class, we expect that it's part of the regular school day and would come from revenue limits like any other course that you are supporting. So,
Mandate Commission sees that differently?
They do, and it's again because of just how it was phrased in the very beginning. The intent
was that before it was an A through G requirement? I mean, you could get rid of it now, and the UC would enforce it by accident, right?
Right. I mean, given that a lot of the schools are meant to educate students to attend the state system, there's certainly a compelling argument.
Are 2 science courses required for A through G now?
Yeah.
They weren't
I believe
83,
so. I think
so.
yeah.
So maybe that solves our problem. Let UC enforce it. Finance, Ms. Oropesa, did you?
Yes, Gina Oropesa, Department of Finance. The Commission actually initially found in favor of the state. We all believed that this science class would replace another science class. It wasn't until later that we were sued, and then the Commission overturned its decision. The court said it was not reasonable for the state to assume that a school necessarily would replace one class for another class, but that we could ask for a reasonable documentation to show that, in fact, you did not replace an existing class with another class, and we could reimburse them. The Commission since has decided to provide a reasonable reimbursement rate to all districts, whether or not they in fact added that second science class or where they were doing this, and that's the basis of our current lawsuit.
Well,
that we think the courts told us that it was okay to have districts demonstrate that they had additional costs, and that's where we kind of are in the process.
And just to jump in on that, so
So what would moot out the lawsuit if we took away the 83 law and left districts to fight with UC on their own? What would happen?
So
stop our liability?
Essentially what we're recommending is, I mean, we support that this is being litigated because it's really the only way to deal with this hefty backlog that we've been talking about. Yeah. So, I mean, really the courts for the prior year costs are your best option.
Yeah.
Our specific recommendation is to add language in statute that essentially clarifies what the statute was always meant to do, which was say you need to be providing this course within the, you know, the scope of your regular school day and within your existing resources. So we recommend that whatever happens with the lawsuit, you address the mandate going forward to reduce the $200 million a year
Have
cost.
you produced that language? Can we
Right. And there's actually
all look at that? Did anybody
right.
act on that?
There's actually language similar when we added the algebra requirement.
Yeah.
So, and that wasn't found to be a mandate. So if we replicate that language with
Well, why doesn't somebody produce that language and get it around to everybody? That sounds like
We're happy to do that.
Might stir some interest.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've had it developed and are happy to share it.
All right, let's get that around as a possible addition to whatever mandate package comes out of this, because that would seem like something we want to do, at least on a going forward basis. All right, page 18, behavior intervention.
So again, this is another large mandate, the second largest mandate that the state's dealing with. It relates to a special education law that was passed back in the 1990s. The state passed a law essentially requiring specific activities in the event that a student with a disability has some sort of behavioral issue that needs to be addressed. Since that time, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the federal level law on this issue, essentially mirrored what California has done, requiring many of the same activities, the same sort of professional development, the same sort of basic training, the same sort of oversight for the students. And so we really just see this as an alignment issue. Our recommendation was to just acknowledge that federal law has changed. This is required under federal law, and that would eliminate the cost of the mandate going forward.
Finance?
Yeah. Lyndon Del Castillo with the Department of Finance. We're open to looking at the LAO's language. However, it's something that we still need to further discuss with the claimants. We don't think that they're necessarily on the same page, and that it goes as far as the LAO suggests.
This is a little bit. When we get down to the 3632, I mean, what is this intervention? Oh, this is the one. Oh, I remember this one. Never mind. This is another one of these 1980s. We thought we did something that would seem to be common sense, and that you'd get sued for if you did it anyway, and somehow it became a mandate, right?
Right.
This is the Terry Hughes bill.
Yeah, and it wasn't even the bill itself that ended up being the mandate. It was just the regulations. And so given that, it's important to note that really we wouldn't be changing anything substantive under the law or the regs. We would maintain them and support them with federal dollars, which was really in large part how the department designed the regs and has adhered to IDEA going forward.
And finance, you were talking about a settlement as opposed to?
Yes, we entered into settlement agreement. We're actually currently being sued, and the lawsuit allowed us to go through the Commission on State Mandates process. We stepped away to negotiate something. Given the record that we all have before the Commission on State Mandates, we felt it was much better to try and negotiate something, and so that's what we attempted to do. The LAO has a new recommendation. Again, the claimants do not necessarily believe that the safety of the students would be or it would be compromised if we do what the LAO suggests, and that's what we want to make sure, that this current level of service continues, and yet we minimize the state's debt
liability.
Going forward,
yeah. Well, at least on a going forward basis, and I'm troubled by having to spend so much on the prior year settlement. But were you trying to say something, Jennifer, too?
Well, this is, I mean, the governor has built into his budget plan a $65 million augmentation related to behavioral intervention plans. And you've had pretty intense conversations earlier today on emergency repairs and other things. So we are trying to give you an option that would just stop the costs moving forward, whether that's repealing the regulations or doing something as we suggest, which is trying to maintain the general policy but linking it more cleanly to federal money, whereas if you don't do it, department would have authority to withhold federal resources. You still get the protection, but you link it to the dollar. But we would argue in this environment, spending $65 million on this activity we recommend sort of just at least considering options for addressing it moving forward. Now, as part of the settlement, there's still more than $500 million that the state might have to pay for prior years. That you might not be able to address, but you can address moving forward.
Yeah, well, we need to do it in the context of the settlement if we're going to avoid further legal costs, so maybe. But the notion of making this no longer a mandate is certainly attractive, however one might do that.
Madam Chair, am I led to believe, though, that there's been an interpretation that regulation trumps statute? That's what I thought I heard you say a bit ago, that this regulation was not consistent with the statute, but the regulation is the subject. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Well, that's right with a slight caveat, which is that really the difference is the law itself didn't create a mandate, but the regulations did. And the reason they did isn't because they actually trumped the statute. It's just because the regulations, by and large, implementing law is given that sort of legal...
The Office of Administrative Law let that pass?
Yeah, it's just one of the quirks of the state's mandate system that whether it be statute or regs, either can be deemed a mandate. It's just how it works in California.
That makes this whole lawsuit thing awkward because you're right. I mean, you'd think that the regulations should not be creating mandates.
This is another example of how government is going upside down and the Office of Administrative Law is not doing its job.
Well, it's the Commission on State Mandates that's the problem here.
The Department of Education's regulations that are
well,
more specific.
But Senator Nielsen's right. Can we just repeal the regulations and solve the problem?
The Department of Education would have to propose or change the regulations or through statute.
You certainly, when we initially looked at this, we recommended just repealing the regulations because we think by and large federal law is going to be enough to provide the protections that you have. Now, in subsequent conversations that we've had, the department has told us that really they feel like their regs are clarifying a lot of terms that haven't been specified in federal law. So federal law will say you need to provide this type of intervention, but then it doesn't really describe what that means or what it should look like on the ground. So we feel like there is a solution where you can essentially maintain the regs, just clarify that state law and regs are meant to be directly in alignment with federal law, that they're California's way of implementing federal law, and keep them on the books. You obviously
it's a federal mandate, not a state mandate. Bizarre. Somebody, okay, let's take a look at this language. Let's talk to the settlement gang, whoever they may be, and see if we can. I mean, it does seem, I mean, I understand the fear on the part of the plaintiffs, whomever they may be, that somehow, you know, but I can't imagine that we would be reverting back below federal protections for people, and they could sue every district in the state if the district didn't do this. So, I mean, I don't know why it needs to be treated as a mandate. That's really the question. Mr. Millenfield, were you? Oh, okay. All right, so we'll leave that open till with further direction and effort to understand how we fix the regulation. Circulate any language you've got on that,
Absolutely.
LAO? Okay. No, it is. It's the Mandate Claims Commission, my least favorite, next to DGS, the least favorite organization on earth. All right. Page 19, prior year mandate claims. LAO?
So essentially, the governor doesn't provide any funding for prior year mandate claims. The Assembly has approved $1.4 billion in ongoing funds to help pay down the mandate backlog, and the Senate's proposed not paying any directly for the backlog, with the exception of this behavioral intervention plan mandate that we've talked about.
Partly because there's a settlement pending, right? Ours is aimed at
exactly and
buying down the settlement.
Regardless of what happens in the settlement, there will be some backlog owed on this mandate.
Right.
Makes sense to address it. while we certainly support the idea of paying off the mandate backlog, just given some of the decisions you're having to make, it's a pretty big amount of money to spend on mandates, especially given some of the distributional issues that we've mentioned before. So we'd recommend against providing at least that sum for the mandate backlog at this time.
All right, well.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Finance.
Well, clearly, in our opinion, we can't afford to pay all these mandate claims back. I have an assumption
Well, but you're paying, going forward, $65 million. We're paying something that's a settled claim and trying to get rid of your going forward claim, and it's almost the same amount of money. So if you put the 2 pages together. We're paying your debt that you've already agreed
right, but
to
as
in
far
the
as affording $1.4 billion in this fiscal year, I assume it's based on the way the Assembly put their bill together, which we've stated our concerns with. So,
this $1.4 billion figure in front of you does not include the BIP settlement money for a variety of reasons. So whether it's $500 million or $1 billion, that would be on top of the 1.4. Also, with the high school grad backlog, that's more than $2 billion. That would be on top of the 1.4. So what the Assembly was trying to do is retire all K-14 mandates from the backlog that had already been settled, that were not tied up in some sort of litigation.
My point wasn't, I get the 1.4 is paying a lot of stuff. My point is, the Senate funded, if Finance agrees with the analysis, $70 million of the $500 million that you've already committed to in the settlement, as opposed to $65 million in ongoing augmentation of budget year funds, which Finance did fund and didn't fund your $500 million debt. So, I mean, the Senate's not as far off of finances. The Assembly took extra money and paid down mandate claims, which is not an unwise thing to do with debt. I mean, it's paying down debt, so it helps a lot of districts.
And that was our concern with the $1.4 billion, not so much with the 70.
Yeah, okay. It was just the 70 struck me as nearly equivalent to your 65, and it's just used a different fashion, was the point. So, anyway. All right, we'll leave that open while we contemplate. Another wonderful formula that needs to be updated. Page 20, the special disability adjustment. LAO, you want to try to explain this to anybody?
I will endeavor to do my best.
This one's challenging.
Rachel Ehlers, LAO. So this is part of our special education funding formula. When we rewrote our special ed funding formula in the late 90s, we moved to a model where we funded each district relatively equally at the same per pupil level. There are some historical differences, but the intention was to say we're going to assume that all school districts have relatively the same amount of special ed students to avoid having incentives for people to identify kids as special ed to generate more funding. When that formula, that census-based formula was put in place, there was an understanding that maybe there are concentrations of some more high-cost kids, low-incidence, high-cost kids. So we created this special disabilities adjustment to recognize that. Did some research on where those pockets of kids might be, and funded particular districts based on their groupings of those high-cost, low-incidence kids. That was in 1997, and we have never updated the data since then. There was, I think, an intention that it would be regularly updated. There was one more study that was done in 2004, but it wasn't put in place. So the districts that received that money in 1997, based on the students they were serving in 1997, continue to get this funding. Those that didn't get it don't get this funding. And you can imagine in the past 13 years there probably has been a redistribution of some of those kids.
Who did the study in 2004?
AIR. They did the original study, American
AIR?
Institutes of Research. It's an outside research group.
So it was a contracted
An
study?
outside contractor, yeah. They did the original data in 97 and then again in the early 2000s. So the states continued to provide this money to the same districts. That they're organized in groupings called SELPAs for special education purposes, but I'll call them districts to make it easier. They've continued to get this money ever since then. So there are really three issues before you right now. One is what to do in the current year, 2009-10, with this funding, because it wasn't authorized in the Budget Act last year. One is what to do in the budget year, this coming year, with this group of funding, and then what to do on a policy basis moving forward. Do you want to continue having this special disabilities adjustment? Do you think on a policy basis it makes sense to look at concentrations of kids and find a formula to do it? And if so, how do you update it? So the Assembly took action to continue distributing the funds in the same way in this current year and in the budget year coming, and didn't address the moving forward issue. The Senate, in recognition that this current year is almost over, that districts have been expecting that they were going to get this money all along and received indication from the Department of Ed that they were going to get this funding, made the decision to hold districts harmless and send it out, but to score it as payment to the backlog of the BIP mandate that you've just spent time discussing. So that districts who were expecting the money could continue to get it, but that it at the same time would reduce the state's credit card. So the Senate took action to do that for 2009-10, the current year, and 2010-11, the coming year, to continue distributing the funding to these 21 SELPAs, this collection of districts that have been receiving it for all of these years, but to reduce the state's credit card at the same time. And then the Senate had language to do a study to try and update the formula moving forward. We think at this point in the year, given the fiscal year ends in days, it is too late to yank the funding back from districts who were expecting it, but getting some credit for it, reducing the state's credit card, makes some sense. If you didn't want to do it on the backlog of BIP claims, you could just say this is for your activities in the current year, 9-10, the BIP activities for those districts. Hold them harmless so they are getting the funding they're expecting.
That should sunset on the SDA?
It's been authorized in the budget bill and trailer bill every year on a one-time basis. It's just extended it and extended it on a one-time basis, and that language was not included in the 9-10 Budget Act.
Interesting. But we put the money out on that formula.
The Department of Ed put the money out with a warning that it wasn't authorized and it might come back. But
that's how we got into this mess.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out why this became.
Right. So in terms of the current year, you really don't have too many options because districts have been expecting it. The main issue is, do you want to use it at the same time to reduce your credit card or not? Hold the districts harmless is just for their future claims, for their BIP mandate claims, these particular districts, they would submit fewer claims moving forward because they've received this money to satisfy it. Recognizing that these particular districts have been getting this money for many years without really any evidence for why they should have gotten it over
others. Obviously the study needs to be updated. There was a reason for this money. It was part of the 602 deal. I do remember that fight. But the world has changed in terms of who's getting. Who we count as the folks that should qualify for the SDA, and what are the multiple barriers and some of those issues. And I don't know that the concentrations are the same. I know of some anomaly situations, for instance, in San Diego County,
right,
that are created by the presence of military and military not funding special ed, and districts that get impacted by people coming from that would not be demographically identifiable because they're really from out of state because they come with the military, and then they're there and they bring all their special ed children with them to a district that gets no compensation for that. There are issues like that I imagine for different reasons in different parts of the state. I'm just familiar with that one. But I don't know how to, and there is clearly some kids who have multiple needs, and what we consider our basic special ed funding doesn't really cover it, and because there's all levels. From less serious that can be in a classroom of 20 or 10 to more serious that need 3 aides and a teacher for 3 people. It's
I think
and I don't know how to. I don't think we've ever really balanced that formula to make any sense.
Yeah, I think, we've been starting to work on some language. If you did want to proceed with a study and you did think on a policy basis it did continue to make sense to have this add-on to recognize higher cost kids. I think some of the goals would be to have it be a formula that people understand, so it's not a black box, and and that it's easy to update, that it can be updated annually or biannually by the Department of Ed, so we don't have to keep doing a different study. We don't have to keep relying on a contractor. Probably you would want to have a contractor help in setting it up and looking at the data
We
in
could
this
contract
first
with
year.
a state university, perhaps.
Right, or let the RFP and see who applied. But I don't think it
Maybe we
would
made
cost
the
a ton
study
of
too
money.
complicated. Why didn't we like the study in '04? Just because it...
I think, from what I understand, there were a couple of reasons. One is that it had different results and resulted in a redistribution of funding, which is difficult. And also, it attempted to try and recreate the original formula, but the data had changed, and so that was difficult because people didn't understand the new formula, and it didn't mesh exactly with the original formula. So you probably want a new formula, a transparent formula, one that's
something
easy
simple like
to recreate.
How many IEPs with what barriers do you have or something?
We have
I
a
don't
pretty
know.
robust special ed data system. It's called CaseMIS, so there is data available.
The data is available now.
But it probably wouldn't be able to be in place for this budget year.
No.
It would probably be in 11, 12 issues. So
the
you would still
question
have
of-
the budget year.
So basically everybody except the governor, right? Or the governor even funded it, sort of?
The governor left the money in but didn't put in the language authorizing it for either the current year or the budget year, is my understanding.
Finance, was it your intent that it go out on the existing formula for this year and the budget year?
For the current year, given the timing, we think it makes sense
Can't
to
change
give it
that.
to the
Okay,
folks.
let's all stipulate the current year. Okay, budget year?
For the budget year, we're interested in looking at the Senate's position on whether or not that money can be used to offset
A mandate.
the mandate.
All right, do we want to act, does it make any sense to act on the current year to quell some fear in the universe that all of us seem to be in agreement that don't want to change the formula in the current year?
But I
Mr.
think
Nielsen?
that the difference between the Senate and Assembly actions in the current year is, are you going to score it as a BIP backlog in the current year?
Oh, I see.
Or even a BIP current year cost? You're generating these $65 million or however much it is annual costs this year.
Yeah.
So you could give it out per this same formula, but say this is for your BIP costs in this
that's
year to
interesting.
prevent the
I don't know what
bill from growing and
impact that has.
growing.
Yeah, but then this
and
bill will grow.
we in Assembly didn't score that because we
That's right.
well, we're okay with we want to spend this money for these 2 years. We're okay with a study for future years of the SDA formula. We don't what you call paying back the credit card to us sort of feels like shortchanging school districts. So we're not at that place. But I think we can all agree maybe to the Assembly language plus some trailer budget language about studying the SDA formula.
Sort out the BIP.
And that would again assume the Assembly action for the budget year, the coming year, would continue to distribute the funding the same way to those who have
Yeah,
gotten
no,
it.
I think we get there, and I think the question is, A, how do we set up the study question, and what would you pay for it with, and is there federal funds?
We think there
or
is.
are there districts that could help fund it, or however we want to do that? And then the other is sort of this attribution question, which is a little
Madam Chair, let me ask a
interesting.
question.
Mr.
though.
Nielsen?
What's the value of the study if someone who a year from now doesn't like the study,
Well, there's that.
as the last study, we just say, well, we don't like it, so we just keep studying in perpetuity. Why could not we just take the action for this year and then for next year order a changing in the formula? Then we would consider that in the due process what the formula was. But let's, instead of study it, order the formula changed.
Well, that's the question. How do you change the formula? What's the data? Somebody has to look at the data.
Right. For the budget year, you could continue to distribute it to those same districts because we don't have the new data scored against the BIP or not. You could also say, in this 1 year while we're collecting new data, recognizing that all districts are struggling with funding, we're just going to distribute this $70 million on a per pupil basis to everybody in the coming year while we're collecting the data
But then
before
you
we
got
rerun
liability
it.
under the SDA. Yeah. All right. This is going to take a little noodling, as it were. But I think, the message should go out universally that folks are going to put it out on the current formula one way or the other, and the question is, how are we going to figure it out?
We can take the current year action to adopt the language and go ahead and put it in a current year bill to make sure that the dollars go out in the current year.
You want to do? Could that be added to that urgency bill we have to do?
Yes. For the current year.
Across the desk, I think. I don't know. All right. Sorry. A little. I think the other bill's already across the desk. So
this funding has been sent out. It's part of our principal apportionment system. They get their monthly allotment every month, and so it has been going out. If ultimately you didn't authorize it, then it would be deducted from a future payment. But that's really a purely technical thing. I think you're okay on timing.
Anyway, all right, this is one of those that needs a little, and it's tied into this BIP question and mandate backs and how to think about the formulas. I mean, I think it is too late to change this, but this becomes one of those deals, members, where every year you're going to, we're going back through the same problem over and over until somebody actually confronts it. I think Mr. Nielsen's right. At some level, we got to deal with the formula, and I don't know how we do that without somebody assembling that data in some format that people can cope with. What are the requirements? And because you don't want, the whole point of this when the 602 deal was done was that there are folks with very severe multiple barriers, and so the sort of per ADA basis of putting the money out works if you have some of the 1 or 2 problems kind of kids, but when you got the kid with 15 problems, you needed some way to acknowledge that some districts were getting, in fact, at that time, more of that. So part of the question is, what's that look like now? And if those children are with multiple barriers are more evenly distributed across the state, then the formula could change to reflect that. And maybe we ought to just look at what's the criteria for the formula and think about whether there are some changes that could simplify it, because maybe that's an option folks could look at, is what did we do to make that formula so complicated that it needs a study in order to review it? I mean, can we think about how to make the formula less, still have some creature of an SDA variety that offsets the 602, everybody gets some formula.
I think that would be the goal of a new formula. Yeah, have it be transparent. Why certain districts are getting the funding, and have it be easy to update.
In other words, we would determine some new protocols, do a study, but could we not then instruct that based on the new protocols and the study, the intent of the legislature is that the formula will be changed? At least if that third step is taken, the formula will be changed language in there, then we're not going to get wallowing around and, well, we don't like the results of the study.
That's a problem. I think looking at what's the criteria is one thing. I mean, part of the problem is also a kind of a chicken and egg in this one. A district that offers good services, people will move there to get them. And so what happens is, no, I mean, it's true, especially in this arena. I mean, good special ed programs are hard to find. People will pick up and move across the state to get their kid into a good special ed program. And so there are some districts, by virtue of their virtue, as it were, as being good providers, whose costs are higher. And somehow we need to acknowledge that without having a formula that's so confused that, some districts get 0 and who obviously, 12 years later are probably entitled to something. So I don't know what the answer is.
So we'll work on language for a study, and we think we found some one-time federal dollars that can be used, and hopefully we can put some language in for the goals of the study and get it in place for 11-12. And so then the decisions would just be for the current year. Do you want to try and score it for BIP or backlog or current year costs for BIP? And then for the budget year, do you want to redistribute it or not? And if not, would you
use it for somebody BIP look at what the correlation between the districts who get the SDA money and their own BIP claims are. I mean, those districts may not have any major prior year mandate claims from BIP. I mean,
I think the agreement on the BIP settlement is that everybody would get it on a per pupil basis. So when we've looked at it, you could at least get the first.
So there would be some for everybody.
Right.
All right. But somehow then districts who got SDA would not get their BIP claim paid when everybody else does. That's a little...
That's true. It would be an acknowledgement they've been getting this extra funding all along.
Yeah, but they would argue this isn't just extra, so yeah, okay. Page 21, there's conference compromise language proposed, I think.
And it covers 21 and 22 language.
The language covers pages 21 and 22.
Right, which are both language.
They're all kind of language issues.
So the language covers 3 items related to
3.
assessments.
Oh.
One of those items on page 24 is that the language
24? Wait, 21.
I'm sorry, 21.
Okay.
On page 21, part of the language would reinstate the 4th grade writing assessment. That's the first piece. The second piece, which is sort of embedded in page 21, is sort of not obvious, but embedded within the 4th grade writing assessment language was also some language dealing with a longitudinal student growth measure. The compromise language just makes it clear what's expected with the longitudinal student growth measure. So it requires the department and the state board to report back by December 1st on which particular growth measure is in development, how it would be used moving forward, and if any modifications might be needed to it if Common Core standards were to be adopted in the future.
Is this a mandate?
Pardon?
To ask 4th graders to learn how to write, is that a mandate? You're crazy. Just asking.
And then the last piece of the language would just have Department of Finance and the Ledge Analyst's Office get together with the contractor for STAR a couple times a year to go over the detail of the contract. So again, our understanding is this is a consensus of the group.
Finance?
We concur.
So you're okay with this too? Okay. We like 4th grade writing. Anybody have any issues with this proposed conference compromise? Going once, going twice, hearing none. On a 504, Mr. Fuentes is out of the room. Oh, no, he's not. He's down there. Mr. Fuentes, you're okay with this vote? Sorry. Okay. On a 5050 vote, the conference compromise language will be adopted. Good job, LAO. Thank you very much. All right. Page 23. Oh, school improvement. We wish there were some. LAO.
Again, Jim Soland, LAO. There should be a handout going around right now that'll lay out some of the school improvement fund issues before you. Just while it's being handed out, to recap a little bit of where the state's been in terms of the programs that it's built. Right now, there is a federal program improvement program that's funded at about $55 million annually and focuses on interventions for districts that are very low performing and that have low performing schools. So again, this is your federal program at the moment. There's also a state program that focuses on low-performing schools rather than districts, the Quality Education Investment Act program, funded at about $402 million per year. And again, looking at the school level. In the last few months, the federal government has passed pretty sweeping changes to how it operates its program for low-performing schools. As you'll see on page 1 of the handout, the significant changes include narrowing the focus to the bottom 5% of the persistently lowest achieving schools in the state. So again, really a focus on schools rather than the district level. It delineates specific intervention strategies for reform models for these low-performing schools, and also raises the per-school funding rate. To help accommodate some of these changes, the federal government is likely to provide in the neighborhood of $552 million to implement the revised program. The Assembly and Senate both took action essentially to implement the program, to use these funds to support the lowest achieving schools. And so there's general agreement about how to implement the new program going forward. The larger issue, which we get into a little bit on page 2 of our handout, is what do you do with the existing district program and the state's school improvement program? So getting into the state program, QEIA, The Governor and Assembly both continue the program as is, unchanged. The Senate proposes streamlining of programs by exempting districts that have schools that are in QEIA or the federal program, or both, from the QEIA requirements, and really just focusing on a single set of federal requirements. So the real advantage here, just to put it in simple terms, is you could very realistically have one school that's involved in both a state and a federal program, whereby under one program, the federal program, they might be required to close altogether and still be receiving funds or be slated to receive funds for reducing class size. That's probably the most extreme example, but you could also have a school where under the state program, they're getting investment to reduce class size, but under the federal program, they're trying to extend the school day or implement some other really specific major reform proposal. And so really all we're saying here is unify the programs, hold QEIA districts harmless so that they'll still get the same amount that they would have gotten under QEIA in a combination of federal and state dollars to support the single federal program that they're being asked to implement at this time. In addition to making...
Is that complicit with the settlement? Is anybody... I mean, can we use these federal dollars to fund QAA and save general fund?
And that is just one piece of the... just one quick piece of how that would work is we'd essentially be generating short-term savings, but we try and honor the settlement by eventually using the funds to pay off the mandate backlog. So really the heart of the settlement is the dollar amount. We would still put that dollar amount towards the settlement, just use it for a different purpose given the overlap in the programs.
Finance?
We have some pretty serious concerns with the LAO's proposal to not honor the QEIA program and the settlement related to it.
Thought he just said they did honor it.
No, I don't think it really does, because what it boils down to is that the funding is expected each year for the program, and that the program will be funded every year. What happens with this is that it basically pushes off that amount of money to some future spending of that money. And so we think that we would really like to stick to that plan of honoring the program through its duration, which is after some adjustments last year through 2014-15. And the other thing, too, that we want to point out is that we really see that
But what do you want them to spend it on?
On QEIA.
But what does that mean?
That would be using it for class size reduction, for paying for counselors, and for paying for professional development. Now, the one thing that...
They can't afford to do that under your budget. So, I mean, how's anybody going to do that?
Well, I think what can really happen with this, with the SIG program...
You don't give them any revenue limits.
I think the beauty with the federal monies is that when these schools that may overlap with being both a QEIA and a school improvement
which is all of them. Is there anybody who's QEIA that's not school improvement?
It's not.
They shouldn't be because they're the lowest 5%.
Yeah. Funny enough, there's actually a decent chunk of the schools that are in QEIA that
are not?
That are not only not in the bottom 5%, they're not in program improvement at all, or not receiving Title I dollars.
So how did they get in the QEIA?
Well, originally it was more of a lottery system in terms of the selection. The bottom two decile schools were eligible for the program.
And what deciles do they have to be in? I mean, it's a lottery system, but there's more to it.
Deciles 1 and 2.
Well, but if you're decile 1 and 2, how are you not in program improvement?
And it would be a combination of factors. In one case, you could be a low-performing school that just isn't receiving Title I dollars, or the flip side is you could be in Title I but not having, making some of your benchmarks. How you would be able to do that and be in the lowest decile, I don't have good detail on that, but I'd be happy to provide a breakdown of what schools those are.
Interesting to see the run of the schools. Who's QAIA and who's state improvement and who's... They should mostly overlap.
Madam Chair,
one would think.
But the SIG schools, though, you have to go through a competitive grant process in order to get there, and you have to do 4 things that are fairly severe, whereas the QEIA schools, they're schools that already have a program in place and they're getting their funding. So maybe staff can help us understand the distinction between the two so we can understand how they're very different situations. I mean, while they might be serving the same population of kids, they're not in the same circumstances. It's not a simple thing here to say that they're all the same pots of money and you can lump them together.
Well, they aren't the same pots of money, but they are largely going
or targeted audience
to the same schools, which is why the LAO suggestion came up.
Just to clarify, in terms of what we're suggesting, is there are 4 intervention models that are being used by the federal government that are pretty intensive interventions. Okay. We're not saying that any schools beyond the ones that would already be subject to them should suddenly be having to implement one of these reform models. We're just saying that in the event that you are a school that has to implement one of them under the federal guidance and also happen to be a QEIA school, given the feds are asking you to do something pretty intensive, let's concentrate our resources so that they can implement the single.
But you don't have to do 4 of those things. The school district can choose to not be part of the SIG program.
No, that's different, though, than the program improvement.
Well, yeah,
this is the federal program.
Which is SIG.
Right. That's right. And this...
No, that's state school improvement.
No.
This is program improvement for NCLB.
No, SIG is...
Right, the school improvement grant money that we're talking about, the bottom 5% of schools, these new 4 interventions, it's an entirely new federal program. Exactly.
If you're getting the QA, does that not create a disincentive to apply for the federal money?
No, this is the ARA money versus the regular program improvement. Is that the problem? There is ongoing federal program improvement money, always has been. It's NCLB. You're dinged and you need to do this stuff, which a lot of us don't like. Don't get me wrong. I have fought that statute for years, but the truth is we got this model and we're stuck with it. So now...
This is a particularly...
Because the ARA had different rules than the ongoing program, right?
The feds are sort of going through their own growing pains at the moment, and they're trying to figure out what they want out of program improvement. And they're not sure whether they want their old rules or their new rules, but they have new rules for states to consider. And the new rules essentially take our ongoing stream, and you know all those rules regarding corrective action, et cetera, but decided to change them up a little bit. So the ongoing money coupled with the ARA money is attached to new program rules that Mr. Solon's been talking about that is called SIG and is related to the 4 interventions. So it's true. Districts apparently under the new federal guidance, and again, it's all sort of moving around right now, but they can choose whether they want to participate, which is very different than before, which is...
The one where my district got mandated to do something stupid because the board said so.
Yeah, so under
those
they were just the old rules. We called it program improvement.
We called it program improvement. Thank you.
It's still called program improvement.
I'm not crazy. I knew there was something going on here.
That's why, again, the feds they haven't unfortunately changed the term, but they've changed the rules. So where districts used to have to go through this first 2 years of doing stuff and then another 2 years called corrective action, and then they went to the board and they were sanctioned. That's sort of in flux right now and is being replaced with this sort of maybe voluntary system for the lowest 5% of your schools that have to do one of the 4 things. So again, I think it really is sort of growing pains. We're not quite sure whether the old rules, to what extent I think if you don't want to compete and be subject to the 4 new interventions, you are subject to the old, but I'm not sure there's a lot of clarity right now as to which is ultimately, as part of reauthorization, going to sort of rule the day, whether it's the old or the new.
Hold on one second. Let Ms. Skinner ask her question, and then finance.
Last year's budget, didn't we leverage some federal funds to offset the QIA funds, and then it created a big mess, and didn't we then have to do cleanup language, a cleanup bill to fix it? So I'm sort of getting the impression that we might be putting ourselves in a similar situation with some of the proposals that are being entertained here, and not sure if we want to, for right now, go that route.
You know, one perspective is that this option, the Senate action, it's actually a little bit more generous than last year, because in last year, the whole QEI program was pulled into Prop 98, funded within Prop 98. Again, this program is otherwise funded from non-Prop 98. So it's competing against health, social services, the whole rest of your budget. And so last year you pulled it in. You thought it's really hard to sustain outside your budget. You still attempted to achieve some state savings even within Prop 98 at that time. By for every federal dollar you got, you tried to offset the cost of the Prop 98 program. Now, the plaintiff, the CTA settlement didn't want that to be done. They wanted this cleanly outside of Prop 98. Now, having said that, it is a settlement, and the statute that's governing your decisions at this point has a dollar amount and a program. We're arguing you can still maintain and honor the dollar amount over time, but in this environment, you can achieve some short-term savings. And because the program itself, the K-3 program, is a statutory program, you do have authority to say, given the new federal rules, we don't want districts to have to juggle two interventions right now. So if they are subject to the feds, if they apply and they want to be subject to that, we're not also going to have you do K-3, but we're going to give you the same amount of money and hold your district harmless for it. Again, the final comment is this is also an area where it's very hard because some state actions are working at cross purposes. Were you to cut revenue limits deeply, you're affecting class sizes across districts, and at the same time you're preserving a categorical that does class sizes for less than 500 schools across the state. So it's just something to consider in terms of balancing all your priorities if you were to want that to unfold.
But it's all predicated, though, that every school would apply for the SIG federal funds in order to generate the $113 million in savings. I mean, that's a huge assumption to make, not knowing that schools are going to opt into that federal program or not. I mean, I don't know that we can say with any certainty that any of them will participate given the four measures that are so
It's a great point. There's tons of uncertainty regarding how many of these schools will apply to get SIG money. States, for those bottom 5%, they apply to do one of these four things. But then states actually can open up sort of another round of schools. So suppose only 100 districts apply for the four turnaround strategies. We're assuming actually that not all eligible schools apply. Maybe 50% of them will apply. But then that will allow the state to take some federal money and canvass more schools. And QEIA will fall in actually both tiers, but they'll also fall into this broader tier. So again, we're not assuming every QEIA. We already know every QEIA school doesn't even qualify. We're also assuming not every QEIA school applies. But we are assuming that rules can be structured such that something like half or 60-some% of them will apply and get funding. So again, we're just trying to acknowledge that not every QA school would want to participate in this.
I think it'd be helpful to sort of maybe, and I don't know if this is the right forum, but to walk through those assumptions, because it's hard for me to see how settlement dollars are going to work in coordination with these application dollars and not knowing what the universe of the application dollars are going to be. I mean, I understand what you're saying. There's going to be some fill-in here as a result of who goes where, but I don't know. I have to look at some of those more assumptions before I'd be supportive.
Yes, we can certainly sort of, under certain assumptions, walk you through the assumptions that get you to certain dollar amounts. At this point, everybody's making assumptions because nobody knows exactly how many schools will apply.
Does the federal law require it to be competitive, or can we make our lives simple by saying everybody who's in this category gets some?
It's required to be competitive for school improvement.
But only the ERA piece or the ongoing piece?
The ongoing piece as well. School improvement.
Is there some approval of it? Is there a plan here, some state plan that has to be approved?
There is, and it's been submitted by the Department of Education to the federal.
And it hasn't been approved by the federal government yet, so we're flying blind here? And do we expect such approval before the end of the month? Anybody?
I believe so. The approval should be imminent. And the money is supposed to go out to implement these four strategies at the beginning of next school year. So the process has to move very quickly. We're actually California was actually a little bit late in submitting its own application because of some extra time was required to figure out who were the lowest 5% of schools and those things. So that's really the only reason why it hasn't been approved yet, is because we were late in sending it in.
In order to opt in, what are the four strategies, just for the benefit of the panel here? So the assumption is that you'll have schools that will participate if they employ one of the following four strategies.
Right, which is either shut down the school, if it's in one of these lowest 5%, shut it down, convert it to a charter, or have a management organization sort of take it over.
An outside organization take it over, right?
Do a what they call is a turnaround, where you basically release half of the staff, replace the principal, and then what's called a transformation model, where you replace the principal plus you implement a number of other things such as data-based instruction, things like that.
So one of these 4 strategies have to be employed in order to win the application process to pull down some of the federal funds. And so, again, the underlying premise here is how many schools would apply for one of those 4 fairly drastic turnaround measures.
Right, and we'd also point out that the QEIA program is, primarily focused on class size reduction, which is, not one of the 4 options. So a school in choosing to participate in the SIG program would, under the LAO proposal, would have to essentially abandon their class size reduction program in order to switch to this new program, which we would think would create a significant disincentive for these schools. And we'd also point out that the QIA
let's just say
was
that a
part
bunch
of
of
the
schools
settlement
don't want to
agreement.
do any of these silly things. So then what happens to this money?
Then you
just
can't
sits
score the
around and we can't spend
$113
it?
million in savings.
Well, forget the savings. I want to get the money, the federal money, in people's hands to make up, to do things, because they aren't going to have as much money as they ought to normally. And what I'm hearing is they're not going to get it no matter what.
So the state has this $552 million is money. It's both the ARA money and the ongoing money. It's all of the federal SIG-related money that California has. And it's already sort of eligible for it. All it needs to do is build a program, one for the lowest performing. So sure, you might not get a lot of players. They might seem like very strict types of interventions to do. The state sort of has to structure and create a program, and then sort of whoever shows up to the field shows up, and the state has to give them their cut. But then there's also this broader program that the state can build that sounds a little bit more like the old program improvement a little bit, where the rules aren't as strict. And so California could do that, canvass very many more schools, Canvas QEIA schools, for example, or any other PI school. And again, the rules are less strict at that point. So the state has $550 million.
But is that in the plan that we've sent to be approved? I mean, what's in this plan?
Well, one of the reasons it's been taking so long is that there has been back and forth between the feds and California as to how will it work in California, and I think some of the details are still being worked out. There's a lot of agreement on how the program will work for the lowest performing schools.
That's the 1 and 2s, but not the 3s?
Exactly, Tier 1 and Tier 2. And then I think some of the details are being fleshed out.
But Tier 1 and 2 tier are QEIA schools.
They are the lowest 5%. So the lowest 5%, as we mentioned before, could or could not be a QIA school. But they are, I mean, the federal regulations do require that the priority for this funding be given to the lowest 5%, the Tier 1 and Tier schools. And those
but only
schools
if they agree to all these crazy things.
They must implement one of the 4 strategies.
But, like, for instance, go back to my problem. My district, who implemented one of those AB 519 strategies, would now be where? Asking for another one and having a whole different strategy? I mean,
no, they would continue. So there's kind of 2 federal programs operating here. There's one that, the old NCLB program, basically that had the set of strategies that you're referring to for schools, and in your specific instance, which was a district.
Yeah, it was an odd.
And now there's also, the feds have come in, the new administration has come in and said, okay, for this lowest 5% of schools, those old strategies weren't enough. We need something more rigorous, more transformative, for lack of a better word, to target those lowest 5% of schools. So if your district can be operating, under program improvement district, under the district-wide program and implementing those strategies. Plus, they can have some schools that were part of the old program improvement that aren't one of the lowest 5% and implementing one of those more broader strategies. And then they can have schools that are actually in the lowest 5% and have to implement the most rigorous strategies, the 4 in the SIG.
And then what if they are improving and move out of the 5% thing or something? I mean, are these is lowest performing based on API or AYP or?
So it's actually based on, it's a little bit looser now. So once you've been identified, you as a district define goals that you think are reasonable for your school to meet, submit them to the Department of Education here. If the Department of Education meets them and you show year after year that your school is meeting the goals you've set out, and that could be something like AYP, but it could also be something like attendance or just other basic engagement measures, that if you're meeting those, you'll continue to receive the grant for 3 years. And this sum of money, the $550-some million, really is meant for districts to implement 3-year interventions for the schools.
But even if you had a plan and you figured you were reducing truancy and you were improving your API and AYP, you still have to fire everybody to get the money. Right?
Well, only under
I'm missing something.
Only under 3 of them. Under 1 of them, you do not. Under the transformation model, you only have to replace the principal, and that is only if you have, if you just replace the principal. If the principal has been there for less than 2 years, then you don't even have to replace the principal.
Because you might have done that under your prior plan for improvement. I mean, it goes to all this piling on to people. I mean, and then I have the persistent concern in many districts who will be identified otherwise as low-performing schools, that it's only because people don't test their children in the language those children have learned yet, which is an ongoing problem for many of these districts. And if you don't allow them to test in the languages that the children speak, then, or write, or are literate in, then you are continually going to have the wrong districts in the pile.
And just to clarify again on this 4th model, it doesn't address your issue directly, but the 4th model, people tend to focus on the issue of whether or not you retain the principal, but really there are a lot of elements of it that could make it pretty attractive to a district or school. One example that I've already used is you would be able to extend the school day potentially. So if you had students who needed extra remediation, that would certainly be...
But it's Tier 3. Only Tier 1 and 2 can't do that, right?
No, that is an option for your Tier 1 and Tier 2 schools. That's one of the 4 intervention models.
No, that's just transfer. It's more similar to what we did in AB 519. Right? I mean, that's basically.
And along the lines of AB 519, just to mention very quickly that the last little bit of our handout is essentially asking the question of what do you want to do with the existing district improvement program. Right now,
yeah, I think that's the one that needs to be.
Right. I mean, so far, all of the proposals would be to continue it. It would essentially be an add-on on top of what the federal government's asking you to do.
We got to make these requirements match, though. I mean, bottom line, somehow we got to give these districts a break here to be able to actually do something and not spend their whole lives noodling about how to report on this.
And that's exactly what we're recommending, is to take the dollars from that program and combine them so you truly have a single cohesive program focused on these new federal requirements.
All right, well, let's everybody keep us up to date as you hear more.
Madam Chair, I do have one more question. It's going to haunt me later. So if you just to walk through what the LAO was suggesting. So let's say, for example, that we were to move with the Assembly plan, which is essentially status quo. Let the SIG program play out, and then we'd see who and who wouldn't apply for those SIG funds. After that, I think the LAO mentioned that there would be a potential for us to create a statewide program to use federal funds as the second layer.
Yes. So as part of the state plan and as part of conversations that are in the midst. The state can use some of that 550. Suppose only 100 million of it were to be used for the lowest performing, and it's spread over 3 years. Say that's 300 million. You still have 250 million to use for other schools that are PI, but not in the bottom 5%.
And we don't have the discretion to use, well, I guess we wouldn't, because we don't know how many folks are actually going to opt in. So the difference in the delta of what's left from what's supplied for SIG and what isn't would be discretionary for us in order for us to begin our own program?
Discretionary to the extent that as long as states use it for program improvement and it's consistent with the state plan, or else the feds are willing to entertain it as part of the state plan, yes, it's discretionary in that way.
So why would we then need to try to blend some of the QIA monies with the SIG dollars today if the natural course is going to be to let the SIG play out, that application process, and then we'll have some additional monies after that? Why not just move those measures and let QIA do what it's going to do? I mean, is there...
You know, our argument over the last few years for what we're suggesting with QEIA is you have a program that, at least stepping back, was intended to infuse money into low-performing schools, setting aside who's actually getting the money. That was clearly the intent.
As a result of a court order. I mean, it's not a program that we entered in. I mean, we had to do this.
Well, the court was actually silent, and even the settlement itself is silent on how these monies are to be used. It says that the state didn't provide enough to Prop 98 in 2004, 5, and 5, 6, and so it needs to provide $2.8 billion more. The state came along in statute and created this program, so it decided it wanted to make an investment. But again, this is back in 5, 6 when the state is in a very different fiscal environment. So we've just been trying to offer options for the legislature to, because particularly this is coming on the non-Prop 98 side of the budget, and there's such intense pressure on that side of the budget, ways to use federal funds for low-performing schools that achieve, again, generally what you would hope is the ultimate goal of trying to improve these particular schools, whether it would be class size reduction or a longer school day or replacing the principal. So again, it's nothing you have to do. You can let QEIA run out, play itself out. It's just it's going to start competing with a lot of other priorities that you want to fund, and it's given what we understand about how the program is intended to work, there are other ways to achieve generally the same objective.
3632.
And we actually do not agree on that point. We do believe that the legislation that adopted QIA was part of the settlement. It may not have been specifically referenced in the settlement agreement, but it was part of the legislation that we and the plaintiffs agreed to, and when the court signed off on it, it was part of the package that was the settlement agreement. And it's an interpretation that both we and the plaintiffs have.
This makes my head hurt. Okay, I do have one list, but I think this overlapping list, I mean, I'm looking at the list of 1 and 2 schools, and some of them are already charter schools, so then what are you supposed to do? It's sort of confusing.
Just on that point, I think for your information, the State Board of Education has adopted regulations that would require that those schools shut down if they're charters and in their lowest 5%.
That might not be a bad idea. Okay. Page 24, let's see if we can, members, in a short time, talk about 2 more issues that I think, like the last one, maybe, I don't know. Well, there might be a shot on this one, but and the other one, which is also a mind twister, or as it were, is 3632. But the education through technology.
So this is another federal program. It goes for education technology. There's $82 million available. It's all one time. The program's being phased out after 10/11, so everything essentially at this point in time is one time.
What there is, there is. Okay.
The legislature, the governor submitted a plan way back in the fall, submitted it to the JLBC, and the committee rejected it. The assembly plan is sort of based upon it's largely based on the governor's plan. So they take about $39 million and give it out to all local education agencies, essentially school districts, as formula grants, and then takes $43 million and gives it out as competitive grants. The important aspect of the competitive grants is that it would go to help grades 4 through 8th graders become technologically literate as they enter high school. So that's the policy goal embedded in the Assembly plan. The Senate plan just has slightly different numbers. Slightly less goes out as formula grants, $34 million. Slightly more goes out for competitive grants, $48 million. So again, the important difference between the two plans is policy-wise how those competitive grant monies would be used. The Senate plan has them going out to try to improve college and career readiness. So one of the reasons that we would recommend going with the Senate is that it helps California meet other federal commitments it's made. So when California took the federal stabilization money, it committed to the feds that it would at least attempt to meet all of the federal America Competes Act requirements. There's a little bit of dispute how many of these requirements California currently meets, but it's clear that we don't meet several in the area of college and career readiness. One of the federal America Competes Act requirements, for example, is that states need to provide students test scores on college readiness types of assessments. So all we're suggesting is trying to coordinate federal and local efforts to try to meet some of these federal commitments. And the Senate plan, because of their policy language, gets a little bit closer to helping the state move in that direction.
Thomas Todd, Finance. I think we appreciate what the LAO is attempting to do, and we don't dispute that there's merit in what they're trying to do. I think we just have a concern with the emphasis that they place in their competitive criteria on the collection of college and career readiness data for the sake of collecting the data. We think it pushes the definition of existing federal law, and so we don't want to jeopardize, obviously, the receipt or the expenditure of these funds, so we would prefer the Assembly action.
I think the question here, I mean, I'm always with you on sort of give services versus collect data, but it was my understanding that the ERA monies actually said collect data or something.
Well, that's a required component under the evaluation piece for this program, but it's not specifically to collect college and career readiness data. I mean, that's
and again, the way the Senate language
data to improve school performance, whatever that means, does that mean we have to use the money for data collection as opposed to counseling?
I think my understanding of the Senate language is written such that under the competitive grant, I actually think any LEA, regardless of grade level, can compete as long as they can make some connection to college and career readiness, even if it would be middle school, for example. But then as long as they can make a legitimate case that this will help them improve college and career readiness, part of it presumably is data collection, right? That they need something to analyze to figure out how to inform and improve their instruction. But presumably that last piece is equally important. Once you get the data, you're doing something with it, whether it's professional development, some kind of coaching. So I think that it is thought that it's partly about data collection and partly about using it to improve instruction. So clearly that's not disallowed. This is not about just making CalPADS better. This is about helping on a competitive district basis those districts who want to apply develop sort of best practices in the area of college and career readiness.
Well, and high school graduation, I think, was part of the Senate's theory. Was kind of where we were trying to go with this. All right, I suspect this is one of those that needs discussion and reconciliation, but at least we are what we are. Okay. These take so much to just understand. I don't know how you pose them. Okay, the CalTIDES thing, that one actually I think we can do something. Page 25, there is an Assembly version. Is this modified at all?
Yes, I spelled it out.
It's a little bit modified, I think. It's Assembly version and specifying that an additional $200,000 in federal carryover funds can be used for CalTIDES or CalPADS, including the DPM3 position that had been requested. Is that?
Yep.
acceptable to finance?
Just for the record, Madam Chair, we oppose any augmentation. We think the May revision proposals for CalTIDES and CalPADS adequately fund those projects.
This was the governor's proposal to add $200,000 in one-time funds to support two.
No, that was a department request at the last subcommittee hearing in the Assembly. The Assembly subcommittee added the $200,000. We did not approve the additional $200,000. We provided the department request for CalTIDES was $5.1 million. We provided $3.9 million and extended 3 limited term positions that are set to expire on June 30th. I think the question from the department is they needed some technical support, a systems analyst. In their request, they requested 2 systems analysts and 1 senior information analyst. We continued the 3 existing limited term positions. 2 of those.
And the rest of us agree with the OCIO that they need the DPM too. That would be the issue.
Well, maybe there's some miscommunication. My understanding is that the OCIO is on board with our May revision recommendations.
They support them, but finance says they have.
Just on the DPM2, I'm sure your staff are mentioning it to you now, but that is actually part of the CalPADS project, and we do agree that for the CalPADS project, they do need to hire that position. We just feel that they have the resources available to them to do that. So
you don't disagree with the position, you just think they can do it within existing resources, and everybody else was nervous about them actually doing that. Given the other, well, part of the difference is we took 70 positions that you didn't in the broader department. So we took 70 positions out of the department. We're adding 1 to make sure these tech projects stay on board.
Yes, I mean, given for that reason, obviously, as well as its federal funds, as well as it's connected to a CalPADS eval that found that the project could use more oversight and management positions. So we think that the compromise is very reasonable.
Anybody have an issue with the compromise besides finance? It's Assembly version, giving the money for that 1 position in here, and that it can be either used for CalTIDES or CalPADS. It's not tied to one. It can be used for, it's sort of overseeing the whole, both tech operations, including this data manager position that the department had. But we took the 70 positions earlier, which is why. Mr. Nielsen?
We clarify it's limited term positions or not?
Now, the 3 you're taking, the 3 are limited term. This one is not. The new one is not.
Right. It's just funding existing positions that they have. The department says that they have positions, but they don't have funding behind them. So the funding would fund existing ongoing positions.
The 3. Two.
The 3 that we have is.
Governor proposes 3.
They had it may revise, and we all said yes to, and then the department came in and it may revise.
So if these are existing.
Okay, so we all agreed to the 3. Finance proposed the 3. Everybody agreed to the 3. Those are extensions of existing positions. They are not limited term?
They are limited term for 2 years.
So those 3 are limited term. The extra position that the Assembly approved that we're suggesting approval of, I think, would be an ongoing position because it's somebody to oversee. It's more of a supervisorial position over the project implementation of these 2 major IT projects. And knowing our history with IT projects, having nobody over there who's necessarily in charge was a little bit scary.
Well, the only problem with that, even when we've hired people and put them in charge, they aren't there long enough to be held accountable anyway. So I'm really questioning. They've already been doing this anyway with existing resources. Why is it all of a sudden they need more money? I know you're telling me you want to hire an additional person, but I'm finding that hard to believe.
They don't. The department does.
Yeah.
Well, and part of our rationale for thinking that this is reasonable is because the CalPADS system hasn't been working especially smoothly. Yeah. And so the folks have essentially come to the state and said it would have helped to be better staffed. This will allow that to happen. If it's on an ongoing basis, perhaps all the better.
Is anybody willing to guarantee it?
You're right. No? I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. The OCIO is oversighting this. I mean, that made me feel better when I found that out. But I mean, it's always a gamble. But if you don't have any project manager, you're less likely to have anybody to hold accountable. But all right, so where are we? 4 us on the Assembly side. 4-2-1 on the Assembly side. 3-2 on the Senate side. The compromise will be approved. Just because we have to have done something here today. All right, members' choice. But if we were to discuss 3632 now, then we would be finished with the K-12 portion of our agenda, which would seem an appropriate place to adjourn if we can manage to have this conversation in less than 10 or 15 minutes. And I don't know if we can. So that's sort of the issue. I don't know. LAO, how long do you think? This is such a long one. What's the committee's pleasure? You want to break now, or you want to hear the last issue, which is long and requires Ms. O'Malley, of all people, to come up and try to explain it?
My fear is it'll take a little bit longer than 10 minutes.
Half hour?
We could try.
We've got 7 pages of handout, just as ahead.
It's a long handout, and it does involve both local government and education and
mental health.
It is 5 o'clock. All right, after you waited all day for this. But also, because we'll have you probably tomorrow anyway on the other, on the local government oversight issue. Okay, members, if we break here, then we got to, but tomorrow is a challenge. We would have the rest of this agenda, and we were hoping to get a local-state fiscal relationship overview. Because I had hoped we'd get through this agenda today. So, and tomorrow we're going to be limited on time just because other committees, policy committees, have lots of bills. And some of our conferees are chairs, not just voters, on some of those committees. So we're a bit time challenged tomorrow. We're going to try to meet at, I think 1 is the new idea. I think there's caucuses on both sides and other complicating factors. So we'll meet at 1. We would like to finish by 3 or so in order for a Senate Trans to meet. So it does limit us, but we've got to at least get through this. Then we could do more time on Wednesday. Could be more like today, I think. There are less, I don't know about assembly committees, but there are less conflicts, well, except rules on Wednesday, right? So tomorrow we were going to be 11:30, but now I think we're 1 o'clock tomorrow. And we probably only have about 2 hours, so if we're not going to, be in trouble. But maybe we'll come back. I don't know. Maybe we'll come back later, too. Maybe come back at 5 if Senate gets done. Senate's hearing 30 assembly bills tomorrow, so it's going to get a little crazy. The problem is most on your side, they're not chairs, but on our side, they're policy chairs, so and vice chairs. And so a lot of our members are out at one time. So we'll see what we can do to continue. We may be able to do some of the discussion without some of the, we'll figure it out. Anyway, plan to reconvene at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And we'll start with 3632, try to get through child care. Apologize to people who may have been out there thinking we were getting to child care and higher ed today. We didn't quite get there, but we certainly hope to tomorrow. So that said, we'll see everybody tomorrow. Thank you. Clear the room for reconciliation.